Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hey, everybody. Are you excited?
Buongiorno.
How's everybody feeling today?
Howdy.
Are you enjoying
Happy.
these cool mornings? We're recording these, end of September. So
Every morning with you guys is cool.
Oh, well.
Yeah, it's more
gross.
of a mindset for me.
Yeah,
Gross. I'm talking physically. I was out in the field this morning and my hands were like a little chilly while I was harvesting.
Speaking of chilly, it is chilly weather. Yes.
Little cup of
Bring on the
chili.
chili.
Chili. What kind of, are you a white chili fan? Are you a red chili? Do you put noodles in it?
There's only one color for chili. It is not soup, Alexa. Soup can be white if it wants to be.
Oh.
Chili should be reddish to dark reddish.
Okay.
Yeah.
It should have rice in it.
Do you put noodles in your chili?
That seems like some kind of Ohio thing.
I put it over my noodles because it's real thick. My chili is robust. And sometimes I can use it as a sauce.
I think you can put it over rice or a hot dog.
Yeah.
Rice?
I've never put a chili over
very
rice.
southern. I like
Chili
that.
noodles in your chili is blasphemy where I'm from. So
I do not do noodles in my chili. No.
I thought you just said you put it over it.
No, I will put it over, like make spaghetti and actually use chili.
Spaghetti. That's what you're talking about.
No,
spaghetti.
that's
Spaghetti.
No, that's spaghetti.
Spaghetti to chili.
Yeah. But no, as far as, Mom would do that sometimes growing up to stretch it because there's a lot of kids and lots of farm people to feed for lunches, like, when we were working. So that was, when you did that, it was an economic decision to stretch the chili.
See, my family just put more beans in it. Like, you need to stretch it further, you just put more beans in it.
Yeah, mo beans. I like the kidney beans.
There's
All
like
kinds of kidney
5
beans.
different kinds of beans in the chili.
I'm team dark red chili. I'm team red chili.
All right.
So.
What about you, Brett? How you feel about chili? Are you a chili boy?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. That was one of the things that my dad always, like, a very seminal menu item at our house that my dad always made. It was a traditional kind of red chili with beef and beans and tomato based and all that. Yeah, I kind of feel like chili unto itself is that, and like there are other variations that are comparable, like the white chili, which I really enjoy, but it doesn't really feel like it's like saying, "Would you like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?" But instead, it has ham and cheese on it. It's like. It's not the same. I mean, those are both enjoyable, but those are not the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Ham is just a type of jelly.
Yeah. And they say that cheese is the peanut butter of dairy.
So what about
I'm going to have to unpack that.
I'm going to be thinking about that for days.
Peanut butter, I can see the comparison there.
Yeah.
Spray cheese,
yeah, just spray it all over.
Did you all grow up with eating a peanut butter sandwich with your chili?
And I mixed in a little bit of syrup with the peanut butter and had peanut butter and syrup sandwiches.
It was just pure hatred at that.
Like maple syrup?
Just table syrup, whatever kind of syrup. Bob White was
like
actually our preferred syrup. Mrs. Buttersworth, that was a good one. Yes, very nice. But yeah, mix that with peanut butter. Sorghum was a favorite. Yes, sorghum and peanut butter. Yeah.
No, I was Midwestern enough to put spaghetti in my chili, but not Midwestern enough to do the
peanut butter.
I always thought of that as like a Illinois, Indiana,
Ohio
thing.
But
Ray is saying he's a cosmopolitan man.
He's a Kentucky boy.
I mean, I put chili on lots of different things because I love it so much. I mean, I'll top dress my soil with it.
My northern Appalachia family are purists in the chili world. Okay, so it's beans, it's maybe a meat. Okay, maybe
hamburger.
Not even
beans.
More meat, please.
Because you might not have the meat because you're poor, so you put more beans in it, and tomatoes, tomato base, tomatoes of all kinds.
I use a lot of cumin. Now I don't want
more of that accent. What's that?
Yes, we need more of that, Alexis.
It felt very
that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Did it come out? Comes out sometimes.
Cumin and brown sugar goes in there.
PB&J with it though. Like if we did sandwiches with something that was like a tomatoey, like chili or tomato soup, it was always a grilled cheese.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not PB&J; it's just peanut butter.
Yeah, it's just peanut butter on bread. Yeah. Or crackers. Some people do like peanut butter and
crackers.
Yeah.
Okay.
My parents did like buttered crackers, saltines with like a little smear of butter on them. That's actually
Yeah, I mean,
that's fine. That is a fine anything. Oh man.
Funny you say that, because I was listening to a different podcast, and they're in Massachusetts, and she was saying how everyone thought she was weird because she liked butter on her saltines, and I was like, that's normal. Like, why would that be weird?
Yeah, what are you doing with
weird?
Your crackers?
I've never had a saltine without butter on it.
What? I have club crackers just sitting here on my desk when I'm bored. Like,
when I was young, my dad would make these things. I don't know where. I guess his mom or something, maybe a vestige of the strange recombination culinary culture of the 60s, where you would take different,
put them in a Jell-O mold.
Yeah, exactly, like Jell-O mold, that kind of thing. It was a saltine, a little dab of mayonnaise, a quarter of a Kraft single or equivalent on that, there. And then a slice or two of dill pickle on top of that.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
It is
a little crunch.
You got crunch, you got tang, you got the sweetness of the mayo.
I'm not mad about that.
Oh man, it is strange. It looks strange.
I'm here for it.
But I would eat some right now.
Sometimes I just I'll go in the fridge and I just open a Kraft single and I just eat it, standing in the way.
Yeah, that's a regular occurrence. Reed
comes string cheese before there was string cheese. Was the string?
Well,
the
funny
square.
thing is you also have string cheese, but sometimes you just want to unwrap a slice of cheese. You know?
I knew I had a problem when my dog became accustomed to me opening cheese, and she would come running. Little Dinah would come running because she would hear the cheese pack being opened.
You hear the Instagram cheese tack song?
Yeah, cheese.
No, what is it?
Cheese stacks. The cheese stacks.
Is that when you tip the bag up?
The cheese starts coming.
No, it's when the dog requires a cheese tack.
Yeah. It sounds like the dog is the tax collector.
Did you ever eat Vienna sausages? Sometimes pronounced Viennese sausages.
It's called Viennese if you're in Appalachia.
Dad and I would eat them in the car, so we didn't have to take the evidence home. We popped the can.
We stashed them in the dashboard of the truck to keep them warm. We had a special spot on the dash.
Solar power, baby.
And then when we needed to cook the Spam, we put it on the manifold of the old farm trucks. We had a special spot on the manifold that would heat the Spam. So we were pretty thrifty.
Wow.
Yeah.
We would just energy cycling.
Yeah,
we would cut those Viennese in half and put pretzel sticks in them as a little edible handle. And when you're feeling fancy, you get the barbecue.
Oh, look
I'm
at
impressed
you
you
guys.
use a handle.
Can we next party? Next party, everybody bring that weird thing that you grew up eating. That should be a theme. Okay,
I want to hear more about it.
I know.
I want to hear more about it. I love regional eating
because I don't really throw parties, but Brett does. So I'm trying to
amazing food. Amazing food.
All noodles, no chili.
Actually, buttered noodles are not the worst. Okay?
Buttered noodles with some buttered saltines cracked up in.
I don't.
I mean, add a little bit of garlic, and you got Alfredo, baby.
You got a sauce going.
We've gotten entirely too excited.
The Italian in me is raging.
I'm entirely too excited about how do we get here? I don't know.
Hold on. Chili, right? Chili has many different particles in it, right? We've got beans,
so many particles.
We got
happy particles.
Very similar to what soil might have in it, right? Lots of different nutrients, lots of different structures that make up a beautiful compound in your pot.
And around here, a lot of it is a brownish red.
I mean, basically walk on chili every day. So what we are talking about today is soil testing. We're going to talk about when to do it, how to do it, as well as kind of how to interpret those results. And so we know we get some calls, some questions about that, and it can be a little bit confusing. So we're here to help you out with that. So that's where we're going with chili. 9 minutes into the episode.
Perfect. Yeah.
Why do you all listen to
Can you
us?
tie in Vienna sausages for us as well?
The smoothest of segues.
I guess that little handle is sort of like a soil probe, which is one of the tools that we might use to test soil.
Yep.
Oh, Lord.
We're really reaching out there, and I love every moment of this. Yes.
So soil testing, right? We're talking about it here in the fall because in Kentucky, at least, it's usually the best time to do soil testing. Can anybody tell me why?
Because the lab has time. Sorry, Brett. Brett was raising his hand. I know we don't have video.
I was just playing the eager school
eager
student.
Yes,
that's what it's called. Student, school child,
school child.
Yeah. So I think of two reasons. One is that Ray said, everybody's really excited to get their soil tested in the spring, which means lots of people send it in. There can be backups in the lab. But the other reason is if you're at all concerned about or trying to make any adjustments to your pH, there might be some things that you might have to intervene on at this point versus later. And you can also be a little more prepared going into spring. Those would be my guesses for why, but am I missing something?
Yeah, no, pH, also like nutrients, and depending on if what kind of fertilizer you're using. So sometimes our more organic fertilizers or our manures, things like that, need a lot more time to break down. And so putting them on in the fall makes them more available in the spring when the plants can actually use them. Fall is by far the best time.
Yeah. That's kind of like our discussion of cover crops a few weeks ago with giving them time to break down.
And there's another really important reason for those of you guys that have taken soil samples before and tried to use a soil probe in summer. They're very hard to get to go into the ground. You will say lots of interesting words, not all of them good, as you're trying to take a soil test. So part of it is hopefully in the fall of the year, the soil is more agreeable to being tested as far as getting an actual soil probe in the ground. If you are using a soil probe, if you're a home gardener, you may be using a trowel, but I tell people not to overlook that fact that in the fall of the year, the temperatures are typically milder. There's more moisture in the soil typically, and that makes it easier to actually pull the soil samples. So that's another reason that I like to take soil samples at a certain time of the year.
Yeah, and I would just add that whenever you do take them, it's good. You should those comparisons from year to year. It's better if they're taken at the same time of the year.
Yes. Yeah. So September, sometime in September, or even later, October is fine as long as you've got some time to get out there and get some nutrients down and a way to protect it either through tilling it in or cover cropping or whatever that is to keep those nutrients from washing away.
Brett mentioned, commercially, if you're working with larger areas, I'm just under the assumption that you may be using a bulk lime, because we break lime down into either bag lime, which neutralizes very quickly, or just agriculture grade lime, which breaks down very slowly. It takes months and months and months to break down and neutralize. So that's another great reason to give yourself a little bit more lead time when taking a soil sample. If you do need to apply lime and it's agriculture grade lime, just keep in mind.
Why would one apply lime, Ray?
If your pH is off, if you have low pH, and that would be indicated on the soil sample. And as we get into talking more about the actual results and the comments that we make as agents, that's something that we always note on there if lime is needed. If it is needed, not always needed, but if it is needed, that'll be a comment on there and how much and which quality. And if you're a medium-sized producer, I know that I personally have to always ask, will you be using bag lime or agriculture bulk lime, because it does make a huge difference on the expected period that's going to neutralize the soil. So
out of curiosity, so I work on campus and don't have to, this isn't part of something that I do regularly, is providing interpretation. So just out of curiosity, in y'all's counties, like about how many kind of soil tests are you evaluating or helping out with a year? Or I guess a year or a month. Just roughly.
Our office does a few hundred. Wow. And I'm trying to reverse that in my head, because in our office, like many offices, there's an agriculture agent and then a horticulture agent. For me, myself, I'll do, I don't know, a few hundred.
Yeah. I do personally, I do about 300, and then my ag agent probably does about that many as well.
Wow.
So and for those of you who are like, wait, what? So Ray and I are horticulture, so we're going to cover home lawns, home gardens, and commercial horticulture production, where our agriculture agents are going to cover pastures and tobacco, corn, soybean, that kind of stuff.
What does an extension agent, quote, doing the soil test or handling the soil test mean? Like, what do you all do? Don't you just press forward?
Yes, that is exactly what we do.
So when you take a soil test in the state of Kentucky, we have 120 counties, we have 120 extension offices, but we used to have 2 labs. We only have 1 lab now, but the second one is being built again. So you will take a soil sample into your extension office, and I know they do this in all states, but how close your extension office is I'm not sure. But you'll take this into your local extension offices. They'll ask you a couple questions. Hey, what are you growing here? How big of an area? Those types of things. That all goes into a system, and then that gets sent off to University of Kentucky's soil lab, where they run a bunch of tests, and then those results get sent to our desks. And so I personally look at every single soil test that is for horticulture that comes through this county, and I give a recommendation. I interpret those results for you as a homeowner, and for me personally, I'm going to give it down to like 100 square feet or even smaller sometimes, depending on what you're growing. So if you've got one azalea, I'm going to help you with one azalea. If you've got 5 acres of watermelon, I'm going to help you with 5 acres of watermelon. And so we scale those. And then also, we may ask you, are you doing organic production? And I'm going to give you recommendations for organic fertilizers versus conventional. And so we ask you all these questions, and then we say put down exactly this at this time, till in or broadcast, whatever. And bada boom, bada bing, bada bang.
Yeah.
Blammo. Boom.
That's the one.
Mic drop. And then we send that to you. So it does take some time. So we usually say a safe bed, even in the fall, we say 2 weeks to get it back. And then I'm going to look at it within the week I get it, hopefully. Or I am, because I can't stand the seeing them on my desktop not completed. So we're going to get that done. So you're looking at, give yourself a month to be able to do that, which is why doing it in the fall is great, because in the springtime, everybody's rushing and it can take a month to get that back.
Right. I know that there are options people can get on their test to do additional things. If they select many options, does it take it longer for you to get it back to them, or is it kind of about the same?
It depends on like what their goals are. If they're just wanting to know like, hey, if I plant something here, am I going to get lead poisoning? Like that's a pretty easy like yay, nay. So the soil test that we run here and that most labs run is going to be, the report's going to show amounts of phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, zinc, pH, and your buffer pH, as well as your CEC. And those are going to be, and they're going to give you a nitrogen recommendation.
And that's the default basic test.
Those are the basic tests. Yep. So that's the standard.
The big nutrients you need.
Those are your max guide. But you can have optional tests. So organic matter, boron. So if you're growing root vegetables or cruciferous vegetables, boron is often a really important micronutrient. There's other micronutrients, copper, iron, manganese, soluble salts. So if you're growing in a high tunnel where you're not getting a lot of rainfall or something, or you've got greenhouse plants, soluble salts are going to be really important. You can also do heavy metals. So remember I said, like, am I going to die if I plant my tomatoes here and eat them? We can run a heavy metals test, but we can even do soil texture, which is cool. So it's not chemical. If you just want to know the level of sand, silt, and clay that you have in your soil or in a particular area, we can do that as well. And that's always a cool thing to kind of add on. But
yeah.
So there's a couple more as well, but those are kind of the big ones that we see people needing.
And so the decision about like which tests to run and all that kind of stuff, what you're growing there, those questions, that's happening kind of on the front end before, when you're filling out the sheet or that, you are filling it out for the person. And then the recommendations will just come to you in your email and or be mailed to you on the back end, right? That's the...
Right. Yeah, we're going to ask you a bunch of stuff up front when you bring that soil in. And what you tell us is going to inform how I give you a recommendation. So like, be honest, like it doesn't hurt my feelings at all, but be honest about it so that I can tell you and you're not going to waste time and money on something if you don't need it.
I'm embarrassed to say this, but we're actually going to be growing 2 azaleas.
It's I'm so sorry.
I've heard this all before.
I've heard.
I'm not here to judge.
Even before we get to the point of like, them bringing the soil into us, there's a lot of work, preferably if it's someone that's completely new to taking soil samples. I know that I spend some time, because I think it's the best time spent to get a good sample, a good representative sample of the section that they're wishing to test. It may be 30 acres. It may be 300 square feet. And these are all things that we need to know up front. Not only that, but we need, as I'm talking to people, if they're brand new, I'm like, well, do you know any of the history on the section that you're going to be soil testing? Do you know anything about that? I need to know all of that, and not only that, but what's the crop that you're wanting to put in, because that's going to affect the depth that you're taking that soil sample at. I mean, if it's turf, you're taking it between a half an inch and 2 inches for turf. But if it's something like other root crops, maybe 6 to 8 inches, or like vegetable crops, typically 6 to 8 inches on tilled soil. So all of that makes a big difference. And the time that I spend working with homeowners and commercial producers, mostly homeowners that have never taken soil samples, that's really great time spent, because that makes sure that they bring me a really good sample that represents the area that they're testing. And then it all starts with that for me. Getting great results is based on getting a great sample.
So what do your pro tips look like if it's not much of a stretch, if I'm a noob that comes into your office and says, "Hey, Ray, I'm trying to grow a 50-foot by 50-foot garden this year. It's going to be some cut flowers, a few vegetables. I need to know what that soil do." How would you respond to me, or like, how would you walk me through that?
Start with usually, trying to visualize what kind of space, which have already laid that out. It's 50 by 50 feet or just whatever. And I'll ask them, is it fairly uniform? Because even there can be, believe it or not, variability even within small areas. So I really try to get at that uniformity. And you mentioned 2 different crops there, which is going to be 2 separate recommendations that you're going to get back, because under our new soil testing programs here in the state that most of us are using, one recommendation will come back for home vegetable gardens. And is it true, Alexis, that my alternate recommendation will come back for like the flowers? I will not treat those the same, even though it is the same soil that I'm sending to the lab. We do that on our end. But how deep, Alexis, he mentioned like the flowers, how deep would you go on those? Is that 6 to 8 inches on
it's
your
about,
average?
if you're growing like an annual flower, like
it's the same for
zinnias, something like
vegetables. So
that.
that's that in your scenario, Brett, 6 to 8 inches, you're pulling the soil sample down. Now, then I begin, in my particular office, we have soil probes that facilitates taking a soil sample. You take a great sample with those. You don't need those. You can take a really good sample with a garden trowel, as long as you can get down to that 6 to 8 inch depth.
You'll loan out those probes?
Yeah, we loan those out. There's a deposit. Now it's important to note that not all offices have those. You just need to call and communicate with your local extension office.
A shovel works just as good.
Yeah, shovel works great. And I encourage people to use a clean plastic bucket, specifically plastic, not metal, not tin, not rubber, because all of those have zinc in them. Believe it or not, rubber has zinc in it. It will absolutely contaminate the sample and mess up your macros on zinc. Rubber will. So no metal, no rubber. Good, clean, just plastic bucket. That's key. And then we talk about sampling patterns, doing like a imaginary tic-tac-toe pattern in your head, going around pulling individual cores. If you're using a soil probe, you'll get a core. It's like a hollow tube, and then you'll get this core of soil at whatever depth. You can accomplish that once again with a trowel, pulling cores from that invisible grid in your head from all around the area that you're sampling. You're putting that into your clean plastic bucket and mixing that up. And then bringing that sample in. And of that, we need what, Alexis? About a pint of soil?
Yeah, I usually tell people 2 cups is usually 2 cups. Enough.
Yeah.
But more is fine.
Yeah.
You give them the bag to take home when they come in?
Some cases, if they've come in and we're working with them, because that gives them a target to shoot for. And so many times, I don't know if, Alexis, you've had this, but folks that have not taken samples before, they'll come in and they'll just grab some bags at the front office, and they'll come back and I will see that shovel slice. One shovel slice of soil in the bag. And that's what you don't want to do. You want to take a composite sample made up of many little individual samples from that area, blended up. And then from that blended sample,
get an average.
Yes, get an average. And those samples, and they said, well, can you just go ahead and take this one shovel full? And I'm like, well, it's not really going to give results, or it's going to give misleading results, and you're going to apply nutrients that may not be needed, or you're not going to apply nutrients that are needed. So that's a soil sample to me everything starts with getting that good composite sample at the proper depth.
To be clear, and I know this sounds like silly to say, but I feel like I have to say it. When we say like that 6 to 8 inch depth, we're not talking about the soil from just 6 inches. We're not saying, go 6 inches down and only take that. We're talking about that top from, the sod or the top of the soil down 6 to 8 inches, that full spectrum.
Trying not to not to get a lot of organic matter in there or scruff. Try not to get like sticks and little debris.
Yeah, don't bring us in your grass. That's not helpful.
Before you bust it up, before you grind it up or mix it up with your hands, your bucket will be full of ideally little 6 to 8 inch long plugs of soil if you're using a soil probe, or cross sections of a shovel slice if you're doing it that method. Yeah. So that, but it's a little plug. Of my job before this, I pulled countless thousands. I don't know, so many soil samples. So the little plugs that sometimes are in my nightmares.
In your nightmares. They're in my dreams.
When I close my eyes, it's all I see.
Any other basic tips on kind of that annual soil test approach?
I always tell, Ray hit on this, I always tell people if they have gardened in that area, or it's something noticeably different, like whether or not maybe it holds water a little bit longer. You always notice that water puddles in that area, or when you plant tomatoes there, they're never as good or they're better, whatever it is. Maybe it even gets more shade, like for home lawn people, like I'm like, take your shade samples separately.
Take that sample. They're like radically different.
Right. If the weeds there, anything that you don't have to know what the answer is, you just will inherently know something is different. So you don't need to be an expert. So if you know that area is different, take that sample separately, and then you can name that sample whatever you want, and as long as you know where it's from, and we'll run that sample separately. Ray was talking about, there's a lot of different ways to bring in a sample, and we can put a lot of different crops on there now. So we can just do general vegetable garden, and that's what we'll do for people who they're going to grow a little bit of everything. They're not quite sure maybe where they're going to put it, but they're going to have a few plants, 10 or less plants of each different thing. We'll run that as something general. But if you do know for sure, hey, this is where my tomatoes are going, or my corn, or my flowers, whatever, let us know. And again, bring those samples in differently, because tomatoes are a great example of, they're very heavy feeders, and they're also a little bit of a diva when it comes to levels that have to be kind of right on point, and one of those is called the Hartz ratio. And so you'll only get that for a tomato sample, and that will be kind of something automatic that happens when we plug in that's what you're growing there. And so this refers to the magnesium to potassium levels. And so tomatoes can get yellow shoulder and different ripening disorders if the magnesium is out of whack with the potassium. And so that's something why I'm like, tomatoes, definitely bring it in separately. Or blueberries, right? Like blueberries really need a low pH. So you don't want to bring that sample in with this as the same sample you're going to run your raspberries or blackberries on, because they need different things. So if you can be specific, be specific.
That's a great point, because like if we know it's a home garden, so many times they'll say, well, it's a home garden. But if you're really into, I love the tomato example. If they're really into tomatoes, you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper and say, how many tomatoes do you have to kind of investigate with them to see if it's really just, which that's going to give you great results if you just say home garden, and that's fine. But as you get on a larger commercial scale, our soil samples are broken down into homeowner and commercial. And when you get into commercial level sample results, they're much more specific, and generally they're for a very targeted crop, as Alexis pointed out. So 2 totally different categories in our soil sample system is homeowner on the horticulture side, homeowner and commercial. Even the forms are different. Homeowner tends to be general. It'll be things like deciduous shrub. Whereas commercial will be blueberries, a specific plant, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Right. Do you know if I haven't looked at all the new things that we've got now? Is there a commercial flower one yet?
I didn't see it the last time I was looking at categories, but it's supposed to be coming, isn't it, Alexis?
I'm not sure. So I'm only saying this because it's personal, but I've done some research on it for those of you who listen who maybe are doing flowers on a larger scale. I tell my cut flower growers to run and I do this, and I tell my growers to do this, to run their sample as a tomato sample. because we have good data out there to compare what flower nutrients are to tomato nutrient, and we know what those like ratio is. So if your soil test for a tomato says put down 1 pound of nitrogen, we know that flowers only need about half of what tomatoes are, or whatever. I'm just making up numbers right now, but half of that. So I know I only have to recommend half a pound if they're doing flower crops.
So when you get your soil test results, you get both the actual absolute results, the numbers, and you get the recommendation from the agent. It's not just the agent's recommendation. So if you're a little more advanced, you can say, I know why you're saying this is the recommendation for tomatoes, but I'm going to use my knowledge of this to interpret the results a little differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you get a lot of info on a soil test, and you'll get what the agent has to say, but you'll get those numbers. So you'll get your soil pH number, you'll get the pounds per acre of phosphorus that you have, and magnesium and things like that. And then you'll get a recommendation.
Well, so based on Alexis's encouragement, to be honest, I feel comfortable admitting, and also based on my great experience with my agent, Ray, walking me through my first soil test, I'm comfortable admitting now that I'm going to put in a 200 by 50 foot small orchard with some apples. And I'm also going to be putting in a plot in my landscaping that has a couple of junipers, a couple of dogwoods, and some other perennials like that. Is there anything that I should be doing differently for those, Ray?
The main thing will be keeping in mind when you pull a soil sample, once again, that's the basis of a good recommendation. Pulling the samples, you got to think where the roots are going to be ultimately on those crops, and where the roots going to be on a perennial tree, on a tree. I guess all trees are by definition perennial, but they're going to be deeper. So you're looking at 12 plus inches on some of those things. And I would have to ask a lot more questions. Is it a dwarf tree, semi-dwarf, so on and so forth? Just keep in mind, that's going to be a deeper soil sample. That's the biggest difference there. And we ask a few more questions. We get into more calcium, particularly on like apple trees, and take a lot closer look at some ratios of things, because that gets into the commercial side of things. And we don't. Then I encourage people. I stop and say, are you keeping records? Because Josh already alluded to it. Records become so important here as you get into the perennial crops, of taking a good consistent soil sample, seeing the crop's response to, whatever you applied, your inputs, the previous inputs. So that becomes a kind of a big deal. Not only the mechanical things behind it, like soil, the sample depth, but also keeping records. So that I start to flip the switch in my mind when someone is commercial, and start to think about things like that, and start to really whittle down and narrow down the crops. And you said what, apples and what in your scenario?
Some landscaping where I'm going to have a couple of Chinese junipers and a couple of dogwoods. And while I'm at it, I'm just, extension is so helpful. So I'm going to ask one other thing too while I'm here in the office, I don't know what this bit is that I'm playing out, but I like it.
I mean, I'm trying to envision this, Brett. It's like a mini arboretum. I like it.
Yeah, and I also have a mighty, mighty oak tree out in front of my house that is a number of years old, and I want to make sure that guy's healthy too. Should I be soil testing for them?
Absolutely. And are they in different zones? It goes back to the discussion that we had just before. You said the front lawn, then you have a back area. So those are obviously going to be functionally different zones just by their very definition, probably maybe on different slopes, maybe not. But one's in the front, one's in the back. So I automatically kind of break those into zones. But
most of the business is in the front, most of the parties in the back in this case.
There you go. And the apples are in the back. Nice. So that's where the party's at.
That's right.
And
cider apples.
Yes. Nice. So now you're throwing curveballs. So longevity there is going to change when we make the third year recommendation. So we could have a discussion on that. Totally.
For some of those,
so depth is one of the things. What depth of soil is for one thing for perennials.
Depth is important, and trees. We always talk about taking soil cores, the soil samples from around the drip line of trees, because we just use that as an approximate indicator of where the feeder roots are. And that it's not perfect, but it's a good starting point to start from the drip line where the limbs on average of the tree end. Start there and take your sample from around that area. When you're dealing with larger perennials, I usually tell homeowners to do that. when you're taking, samples for existing plants, large existing plants. So just keep that in mind.
One thing you can do, like I know we're talking about soil sampling today, and soil sampling is the thing, right? It's like the number one that we're going to recommend to do. But if you are seeing some issues and you're like, well, my soil sample didn't really seem to show anything missing, or I put down what I'm supposed to, especially for your perennial plants, but you can do this for annuals in your garden as well, is tissue testing. And so tissue testing is just leaves, and they will squeeze out the juices, press them out, and take a sample. And that's kind of what's immediately available. So where the soil testing is showing you what could be available to that root system, the leaf is going to show you what is actually in that plant at that given moment. And it could be different from a week to week basis, what's in there, and depending on the time of year. But if you're having any issues and you started first with the soil test, that is always going to be the first thing. You can then move on to foliar testing and say, what am I missing? And maybe it's that, you did put down that calcium, but it ran off because you got a slope or something like that. And so we're seeing a calcium deficiency in the leaves, or it could be that your soil is compacted. So maybe you put that down, the calcium is still there, but your soil is so compacted, you're not taking it up. And so there could be some other environmental issues, some abiotic issues that are causing that plant not to be able to take up the nutrients that are technically available in your soil.
That's another regional difference. And you said tissue sampling. We always called it Kleenex sampling.
Oh my God.
That's the trade.
No endorsement intended or implied.
Somebody write that down in a book. Brett's dadism.
Gonna go in there. He was on it. He was not gonna.
He was so
slide.
pumped. He was like, please stop talking. Please stop talking.
Well,
I've got a joke.
Well, you're gonna ruin it by passing it by.
Data. This is the whole part of the whole crux of extension is like that we're talking about some data-informed decision-making. And in some cases, the data will not be conclusive, at least initially. And it's like, okay, well, we know that the soil isn't a problem based on the fact that we did a good sample based on what Ray had described. We had good conversation and analysis, talking to Alexis about this. So it's something else is going on here. And then you add more data points and you try to, and that's fundamentally what we're doing, which I think is really, that's why soil sampling is it's such an extension topic. It's like so OG extension back, way back, because it's a really nice
based on records that are 100 years old. It's amazing that, like nitrogen, for instance, is based on just thousands and thousands of hours of research and crop responses to get an approximation to come up with a composite number. For something as complex, because nitrate in the soil is absolutely no indication of whether or not that's going to be available to plants. Organic matter is absolutely no indication in the soil of, and nitrogen's the most limiting, factor for plant growth in the world. And we have to approximate that. And the only way we can approximate it is through experience and research. So soil samples, kind of it's a near and dear extension topic, because there's so much information and effort that have gone into these numbers. And it's interesting that it really varies. If you go out to the western US where they have more sandy soils, it's really, really going to look different. Or Josh, I know you have some experience in Florida, and were those really sandy areas that you had experience in? They're going to behave completely different in how they do kind of make recommendations and things, aren't they?
Well, yeah, when I was in kind of coastal Georgia was very sandy, and just in general, the South has a problem with like
nutrient leaching.
Nutrient deficiency, but specifically like certain micronutrients, like boron deficiency is very widespread. And then when I was out in New Mexico, they have. It's almost always the recommendations are coming back for sulfur, and then also like EC or soluble salt buildup is a huge deal, right? Like salinity is kind of the mother of all issues out there.
And what's the sulfur application?
I want to say it has to do with soils being like way too basic.
Yeah, it's like sulfur is sort of like the opposite of lime in the as far as the soil pH adjustment. That's something I had to learn because I didn't know those things at one point.
If you have blueberries or rhododendron, sulfur is your friend.
And that's another important thing we talked about, like lead time on soil samples. When you have a specialized crop like blueberries, for instance, it's really important to give yourself a year or two. I know that's a lot of lead time, but it's not uncommon for a specialized crop such as blueberries, that's acid loving, likes a more acid soil. And homeowners think, or even some commercial producers are like, well, we can, add sulfur in the amounts that we need to neutralize that, and then we're good to go. But the problem is you need sulfur in such amounts that it would burn the roots off. So the only answer to that, to do mass changes in your soil, is preferably to put down some of those amendments before the crop's ever there, these perennial crops. And that's a really great point on timing. That and I know that's a very specific scenario in soil sampling, but we do stress to homeowners. And if you want to wreck a homeowner's good mood, you can say, they'll come in and they've planted their blueberries, and then it's really pH of 8.2 or something, and they're like, well, what can we do? We're like, well, you can start to acidify, but they're probably going to be dead before you are able to make the amount of acidification necessary. So timing is super important. Give yourself lead time for these things. I can't stress that enough in soil sampling. Yeah, in a lot of scenarios, you can come in a few months before and you can get your home garden recommendations, no problem. But some of these specialty crops, commercial producers are generally thinking ahead any which way as they're planning to put in new enterprises. So it's not a huge issue, but just be aware of that as a homeowner if you're looking to put out some blueberries.
Yeah, I mean, in general, adjustments to soil composition are much more successful if taken gradually. Same way with like building organic matter. I have organic matter not the nutrient stuff, but like pH and like I'm gonna dump 18 truckloads of compost onto my soil, and now my organic matter is 40%. Like, no, that's not exactly, but
not ideal either.
So sorry, I just had two more noob questions.
Yeah, go for it.
So one is, how big of an area, maybe it's not even the right way to ask the question, but how big of an area before I should consider taking multiple samples? I know, Ray, you mentioned front yard, backyard should be separate samples, but like,
that's a tough one.
Do you have any general kind of thoughts on that?
I would say
West Kentucky, it may be 50 acres, 100 acres. That is absolutely uniform with uniformity is incredible. So what's your take on that, Alexis? And Josh, even you probably dealt with large commercial spaces that were pretty uniform.
Well, I've seen in a publication, if something is truly, truly uniform, there's no sense.
If you don't know, that's different. If you don't know that it's uniform, that's the problem.
Well, and because if things are a mystery as to what was there historically, then you can't make any assumptions.
No, you can't do that. That's correct.
But I have seen, if you're looking at for like a rough number, the thing I've seen in publications is that you break a field down into something like 2.5 acre grid cells. And somewhere around there. But, you can make, I think it's just kind of how many different samples do you really want to be taking? And, what can you sort of justify? Because there is a cost associated with these.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Back in there, so my other question, but I'll say, you can also take a bunch of samples if you are excited about that prospect.
I was literally just going to say that. I was like, how much do you want to know? And maybe I'm confused at your question, Brett, but like you're talking about like how many bags do you want to bring in? Is that what you mean by a sample? Or are you talking about how many plugs I want to take?
The point. Yeah, maybe
No. I'm talking about how many bags, how many individual samples. Like, do I need? So like, let's say, for instance, here's one example. I live in Lexington on a 1/4 acre lot. And I have an area in the back where I would do a vegetable garden, an area in the back where I do perennial flowers, an area in the back where I have trees. Should I be sampling each of those independently? I mean, it's a 70-foot by 50-foot area that all three of those things are located inside.
Put it this way, let's assume that that's a uniform lot, and I'll revisit that in just a second. Let's assume that it's a uniform lot. How we handle that in our new soil sample program is you bring in one physical sample, and then we can do what's called alternate recommendations on one sample, meaning we can do one for trees, deciduous trees. We can do one for, your apples, and it'll take the same sample and run alternate recommendations for multiple crops. Now let's go back to like home spaces, the home lots. They tend to, from my experience, intend to vary incredibly, more so than ag fields.
Right.
You may be able to assume that you know the cropping history of a 10-acre ag field, and it's pretty uniform. You need one sample, but I've seen small home lawn areas, that need 4 or 5 to adequately capture that area because it's been intensively managed over the years. So it's counterintuitive. These small urban spaces or small home spaces sometimes need more samples than large ag operations, believe it or not. And it all goes back to that. Well, has there been a bed there for years of azaleas or whatever? Or has that been a little spot that you've had your vegetable garden for years? And it's based on use areas and soil structure. So cropping history and structure, both of those play into that. So a small home space may need multiple samples. So yeah, it's kind of
that. So when we moved in, I work for the ag college, so we took 6 samples in the back in that space that I just talked about, and we took probably 4 samples out front. Nice. And they were different enough that I was glad that I took them. And now I did some follow-up samples recently, and I think I took in a total of 4, 2 from the front and 2 from the back, because I kind of knew where the general variation was. And also you mentioned the management difference. Like there's the one area that has been disturbed with tillage, and the other area has just been growing up into a massive biomass and flowers and grass and dying back and not touched at all. And that kind of discrepancy. And so my other question is, noob question before I turn it back over to Alexis, is how do you, is it soil test every year? Is that the recommendation, or is that overkill, oversampling? Is that
depends?
Yeah. Depends so how often?
For homeowners, if it's a home garden, it doesn't absolutely have to be every year. I oftentimes say every 3 years is fine, unless you see that you have to correct a rather large pH problem, for instance. And then I want that homeowner to take a sample that year and then come in and bring me a sample the next year to see how effective their lime did in neutralizing or adjusting that pH. But for homeowners, a lot of times, if it's a home lawn, not a lot's going on besides just mowing, not a lot of disturbances every 3 years. But Alexis, you're commercial people, that may not be often enough. Is that right? For like flowers, do you do every year?
Yeah. So I would recommend, if you're cropping intensively, then every year would be ideal, especially if you're adding amendments or you're cover cropping in some way. Every year. So if you're putting down compost, if you're cover cropping, you need to kind of see what's working for you and what's not. So
based on the value of the crop also. You have a very valuable crop there. Yeah. And I tell people to take that into account. If it's a valuable crop, I'm going to do it every year regardless.
Well,
for my records.
And it's not like soil sampling is that expensive when you do have to pay. Like here in Kentucky, if you have to pay at all, not some counties run specials, like they have a sponsor, and so certain times of the year, if you bring a soil test in, it's free. But even if it's not free, it's like $7. It's still $7, maybe $10, and that, like, you get organic matter with that. And even if you have to send it off, so like when I was buying a house, one of the stipulations of buying a house was a good soil sample result, because I was farming, so that was important. But I needed those results quickly, and I couldn't wait 2 weeks to send it off to UK. I needed them that week, so I sent it off to a private lab, and it was like $20, maybe $30, but like that was max, and I got a lot of stuff to go with that. So if you're going to put, if you're going to spend $100 on seed, and if you're a commercial operation, you're probably spending a lot more than that on inputs. A $30 test is a drop in the bucket for what that can do for you if you don't have to put down a lot of fertilizer, or you do, it can save your crop. So to me, it's like kind of not even on in the ballpark for something to worry about price wise.
In light of this, it's a handful of plugs in the bucket as opposed to a
handful of plugs in the bucket, man.
Nice.
It's fine. Yeah. I wanted to, and maybe this like makes me sound defensive, but Brett said something about how like there's so many different variables and we always are trying to collect these different data points. And any of you who maybe have ever been frustrated when talking to your extension agent because they just don't seem to have an answer for you, just a reminder, I've said it once, I believe, I'll say it again. Plants don't read the book. They do what they want, and Mother Nature is very variable. And so we can have your soil sample come in, we can do a foliar test, and all of those come back good. And we're like, okay, so it's not nutrient. So we have to go through all of these different things to figure out, maybe it is your soil, but it's the texture of your soil. It's not the nutrient capacity or the holding capacity of that. And so you have to be kind of patient. There's not always an easy answer. And I feel like I say that a lot when I'm talking to people, like, why is my tree suddenly seem to be dying? Well, it's not suddenly dying. It's been dying. Suddenly. And it's just now showing this, the symptoms of it. And,
not in like a Buddhist, like, we're all dying.
We're all dying. Sylvia here.
Like, there was something there. There were signs.
I don't know if how many times you guys have heard this, but like, you see this big old oak tree maybe that's dying, and you're like, well, it's old, an older tree. You can tell it's old and it's been through some things because it's in an urban environment. And people are like, well, oak trees live out in the forest for like 300 years, and I only planted this 30 years ago. And I'm like, well, but the lifespan is
friends to lean on.
Yeah, they have very different there's more that goes into that. And I, as someone who has like a master's in plant science, like, I definitely don't always have the answer. And there's plenty of PhDs, despite what they might tell you, that don't always have the answer.
No,
bro, the effects of like growing within a forest context and like growing alongside other plants, that stuff is crazy. There's like this. Neil sent me an article about, I think it was the New York Times. It was about these like little microforest planting things that they're doing. And the idea that like these things grow so much faster than they would if there was just one of them.
They have their friends.
Even though they're competing with each other. I mean, so like Josh they have their friends to lean on is like a real, we're tricksters around here. We're jokesters. He's real. This is real. That was a real comment.
Speaking of tricks, I remember getting really upset with a forestry professor that had this question. Well, actually, it was botany, and I won't mention Dr. Ralph's last name. Famous botanist at Berea. Really, I mean, super guy, but he loved putting this question on his test. He said, what's the most limiting factor, keyword? He said most limiting nutrient in forestry growth. And I was like, nutrient, it has to be nitrogen, because, I was thinking of nutrients. And then, the test came back and he said, wrong. He said, it's sunlight. I'm like, sunlight. And I remember us getting this argument. Sunlight is not a nutrient. He said, oh, I meant to put factor. So we had this whole thing. And I was like, and the whole class got a point. And I was like, I will not back down. It's the only argument. One of the few arguments I got with a professor in my undergrad. I was like, it is not a nutrient. Sunlight is not a nutrient. But yeah.
The trick of the riddle is that I meant factor.
Yes, the trick is I misspoke myself when I really actually meant this.
The question inside the question.
I know what I
words mean.
Ecosystems, and I guess he was just speaking. He's trying to get us to think more on an ecosystems approach.
Sure.
And soil sampling kind of speaks to that, because it is a snapshot. A lot of times, if soil sampling is a good base, it's a very, very important base for understanding of growth and plant health. And if that doesn't tell us all we need to know as agents, we will go a lot of times further into other deeper investigations, such as tissue analysis that Alexis mentioned, so that we can, kind of put other data points into play there. But soil sampling just can't be understated. It's
always the first thing I say.
It is. And I know that's a broken record. Our master gardeners, Alexis, are so sick of us saying that, but I teach the soils.
I teach the soils section for the master gardeners, like around this general area, and they hate me, I think. So
well, it's one of the things. Samples. I was going to say, it's one of the things where, a lot of people, you can look at a plant and maybe you don't know what's wrong with it, but you can tell when it's in distress, or you can tell when it's not.
You feel it.
You feel it inside. I'm that way with soil, unlike the rest of you. No, but
excuse me?
That's the important thing about a soil test, is it kind of reveals like the mystery of what's going on there, because you can't just look at a soil for the most part and know that something's off, right?
Maybe you
can't see.
But it's good dark soil, Josh. It's going to be amazing. It's good dark soil.
And really, it's like super anaerobic and has oxygen.
It's just tilthy because it's
just juicy.
It's like there's a smell.
Got a sour smell to it.
That smells.
Smell. Yeah.
Do you all have a favorite flavor of soil at all?
Of what?
Favorite flavor of soil?
Crunchy.
I love.
Earthy.
Listen,
I always go to Costco
smell.
when they're giving out the soil samples. That's why
I like me some good. I like a clay loam.
Yeah,
I like a loam.
But I know
the clay.
what I'm good at.
The clay.
Yeah, clay's good.
Well, do we have a plan to take us home?
So to recap, we'll do a quick recap for you.
In recap,
do a soil test. If you're not sure, like, know what you're going to sample for, and if you're not sure how, deep to go. If it's a perennial, you're going deeper. You're going 8 to 12 inches. If it's an annual, you're looking at 6 to 8, and if it's turf, you're probably looking at 2 to 4, something like that. That's a good rough number for you. And if you don't know, call your local extension office and ask them, and maybe they have a probe for you that you can rent for your soil sampling. So do it. We recommend doing it in the fall for most areas of the, I don't know what it would be for Florida and Georgia, but in Kentucky it's fall.
I bet. I'm sure it's the same thing.
They don't have seasons and stuff.
So I guess we could say do it, 4 to 6 months before you plan on doing your major crop, maybe is a good way to do it. And then, get that soil sample done, get your results interpreted, make sure you're specific about what you're asking for, and there's no shame in asking for it. So be specific about what you're growing there. And what else am I missing?
It's a pretty good recap. Just remember, it all starts with pulling that good sample. And
pull a good
if
sample.
in doubt, just call your local extension office and get details on what they need to give you the best results for what you're doing.
And if you are not in Kentucky and don't have a county extension office and you don't know how to find your extension office or something along those lines, you can contact us at hortculturepodcast@l.uky.edu. You can find that in the show notes. You can also find us on Instagram at Horticulture Pod, and you can send us a message over there if you need more info on soil testing or foliar testing or want to hear something else that's really cool. We always welcome. Otherwise, we're just sitting around. We're like, what are we going to talk about next time? And trying to find something that
without you.
We're nothing without
we're nothing
you.
Without you, our audience.
Beautiful. And we are also nothing without your reviews. So if you could leave us one, that'd be great. Thanks. But
if you're listening on Spotify and they don't do the rating thing, make sure you're following us, and as penance, tell 10 friends and make them listen to it.
Yeah, please.
Kidding. Really appreciate y'all listening.
Yeah, we hope you like it. We do this for you all. I mean, it's fun for us to get to see each other, and we
enjoy talking about
and chat. We like to talk about plants, and this gives us a good excuse.
When I have YouTube people that I watch, I refer to them as my YouTube friends. I actually just refer to them as my friends, and then people are like, "Oh," and I'm like,
"My best friends."
Actually,
my bonsai friends.
You can't meet them because they live in San
they don't
Francisco.
live around here.
They live in Canada.
Yeah.
But
we'll be your podcast.
If you all refer to us as your friends, that is the most awesome thing that I've ever conceived of.
And if you say that and haven't left us a review, you're dead to me.
Yeah, you ain't no friend of mine.
Bringing it back home.
Leave friends reviews.
Friends leave friends reviews, but it does help us get out to other people's earbuds. So we do appreciate that.
And
so
feel free to recommend to other people that might like it.
Yeah, please.
Link them up. That little share icon.
Help us out. I've been posting some funny stuff on Instagram, so follow us on Instagram.
Please
share it. We're not desperate, we swear.
Smash that like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Smash it.
Well, we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and join us next time as we talk about some cool plant things and send us your recommendations. Anyways, have a great time. Have a great week. We'll talk to you later.
Nailed it.